The laughter cut through the ballroom like shattered glass. She touched her scarred face instinctively, shrinking beneath their stares as the crowd parted around her like water avoiding poison. From across the room, he watched, a faceless waiter invisible to the wealthy guests. But, unlike them, he saw beyond her burns to the dignity they mocked. When the father-daughter dance began and her own father turned away, the waiter made a decision that would shock everyone in the room, including himself. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story touches your heart, subscribe to see more moments where simple courage changes everything. The Belarus Grand Ballroom glittered with Manhattan's elite at the Winterstone Technologies annual charity gala. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, while champagne fountains bubbled at either end of the vast space. Business titans draped in designer wear appraised each other's worth with practiced smiles, their combined net worth rivaling the GDP of small nations. A string quartet played gentle classical music that floated above the buzz of conversation, providing a refined soundtrack to the evening's display of wealth and influence. The theme of the gala, Innovation for Humanity, was emblazoned on elegant banners suspended from the soaring ceiling, though few of the attendees seemed particularly engaged with the actual charitable causes being supported. Octavia Winterstone stood alone near a towering ice sculpture, her fingers absently tracing the condensation on her untouched champagne flute. At 24, she possessed the poise that came from a lifetime of wealth and privilege, but there was a tension in her shoulders that suggested constant vigilance. Her emerald gown had been custom designed to complement her auburn hair, while strategically covering most of her right arm. Despite the artful styling, nothing could fully conceal the burn scars that marked the right side of her face and neck, disappearing beneath her collar, only to reappear on her exposed right hand. The contrast between the smooth, perfect skin on the left side of her face and the textured, reddened tissue on the right created a division that many found impossible to ignore, though few had the courage or compassion to look directly at her for long. Across the vast room, Emery Calloway moved with practiced efficiency between clusters of guests, a silver tray balanced expertly in one hand. His waiter's uniform was pristine, his movements so smooth and unobtrusive that most guests took their champagne without even glancing at his face. Only the most observant might notice the weariness around his eyes, or the small photo of a young girl tucked discreetly into his breast pocket, visible only when he reached forward to serve. "Another Cristal, sir?" he asked a tech executive whose company had recently announced massive layoffs while increasing executive bonuses. The man waved him off, without looking up from his conversation. A group of young executives from rival tech firms huddled near the raw bar, their voices dropping to theatrical whispers as Octavia approached the refreshment table. "Daddy's charity case," one murmured, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Ironic that her face looks like she fell into a donation bin. Laughter rippled through the group as Octavia pretended not to hear, her scarred hand trembling slightly as she reached for a fresh glass. She had endured far worse in the 3 years since the accident that had claimed her mother's life and left her permanently marked. Still, each new barb found its target, regardless of how much she had prepared herself. Thaddeus Winterstone commanded attention from across the room, his silver hair and impeccably tailored tuxedo marking him as the evening's host and benefactor. At 58, he carried his success in every gesture, every calculated smile. He stood at the center of a circle of admirers, one hand in his pocket, the other animatedly describing his company's latest breakthrough, as if sharing privileged information, though most of it had been featured in the Wall Street Journal that morning. When he approached his daughter, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Octavia, darling, the Sheffields are asking after you. Do make an effort tonight. This gala funds our public image as much as actual charities." "Yes, father," she replied, her voice soft but clear. As she turned to leave, she bumped into Emery, who steadied his tray with practiced ease. Their eyes met briefly, his widening slightly as he noticed her scars, but not with the usual disgust or pity. Instead, there was a flash of recognition, as if he saw something beyond her damaged skin. "My apologies, miss," he said simply, then continued his rounds. The exchange was brief, but something in it lingered with Octavia as she made her dutiful way to entertain her father's business associates. Most people either stared too long at her scars or work so hard to pretend they didn't notice that the effort became its own form of acknowledgement. This waiter had done neither, had simply seen her and moved on, treating her with the same casual respect he might offer anyone else. The Sheffields, a silver-haired couple whose family had been in steel manufacturing for generations, greeted Octavia with the overly bright enthusiasm of people determined to demonstrate their enlightened tolerance. Mrs. Sheffield immediately launched into a story about her cousin's daughter who had been in a car accident, as if all scars created an immediate kinship regardless of circumstances or personality. She found this wonderful makeup, darling. Absolutely miraculous coverage. I should get you her contact information, Mrs. Sheffield said, patting Octavia's unmarked hand while carefully avoiding looking at the scarred one. Thank you, but I'm quite comfortable with my appearance, Octavia replied, with the practiced smile that revealed nothing of her true feelings. Mr. Sheffield changed the subject to Winterstone Technologies' latest stock performance, clearly more comfortable with numbers than with addressing the young woman before him. Octavia provided the appropriate responses while a part of her mind wandered, wondering what it might be like to have a conversation where her scars weren't the unspoken centerpiece. The subtle cruelties accumulated throughout the evening, like invisible paper cuts. A woman dramatically changed direction to avoid standing next to Octavia. A photographer covered his lens rather than include her in a group shot. Conversations halted when she approached, then resumed with forced brightness and obvious discomfort. Through it all, Emery observed from the periphery, his expression carefully neutral as he served drinks and collected empty glasses. But when he overheard a particularly cutting remark about damaged goods from a woman dripping in diamonds, his jaw tightened, and for a moment his professional mask slipped to reveal something deeper, a quiet dignity and simmering resolve that suggested he'd fought his own battles. During a brief lull, Emery ducked into a service corridor where the staff moved with controlled urgency, a parallel world of labor supporting the leisure above. He checked his phone, the screen illuminating his face in the dimmer light of the hallway. A text message showed a teenage girl with his eyes, sending a photo of an honor roll certificate with her name, Wren Calloway, prominently displayed. He texted back, "So proud of you, Wren. Double shift tonight, but I'll be home by midnight." The moment humanized him further, revealing the motivation behind his careful, efficient work. "Calloway, back to the floor," the catering manager called out. "Table 7 needs wine service, and someone knocked over a tray of canapes near the east entrance." "On it," Emery replied, tucking his phone away and straightening his already impeccable uniform before pushing back through the swinging doors into the glittering ballroom. Back in the main room, the quartet had been replaced by a full orchestra, setting up for the evening's formal program. Guests began gravitating toward their assigned tables, consulting small cards with elegant calligraphy. Octavia found her seat at the head table, prominently placed but also exposed like an exhibition. The chair beside her, reserved for her father, remained empty as Thaddeus continued networking, maximizing every moment for business advantage. Octavia sat with perfect posture, her scarred right side angled slightly away from the crowd out of long habit. Emery appeared at her elbow, serving wine with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown all evening. "The red is particularly good tonight," he said, a small kindness in offering information she hadn't requested, treating her as a person with preferences rather than an object of curiosity or pity. "Thank you," she replied, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Something passed between them in that moment, a flicker of recognition between two people accustomed to being defined by others' perceptions. Then a senior staff member appeared, frowning slightly at Emery's brief conversation with a guest, and he moved on to the next table, professionalism once again foremost. Thaddeus finally took his seat as the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the program. He briefly squeezed Octavia's unmarked shoulder, the closest thing to affection he typically demonstrated in public. "You look lovely tonight, darling," he said, the compliment so automatic it had lost any genuine meaning years ago. The evening progressed through predictable stages, a 5-course meal interspersed with speeches about innovation and philanthropy. Octavia performed her role flawlessly, smiling at appropriate moments, applauding at others, all while feeling increasingly invisible despite being perpetually observed. Halfway through the dessert course, Thaddeus took the stage, delivering practiced remarks about innovation, opportunity, and giving back. In the audience, Octavia maintained her perfect posture, smiling at appropriate moments even as nearby guests shifted subtly away from her. Winterstone Technologies believes in building not just the future of business, but the future of community, Thaddeus proclaimed, his voice carrying the perfect blend of authority and manufactured warmth. Which is why tonight, I'm pleased to announce our largest charitable commitment to date, a $15 million initiative to support education in underserved communities. Applause rippled through the room, the wealthy congratulating the wealthy for their generosity, a circle of self-satisfaction that rarely extended beyond their own radius. And now, Thaddeus announced, the orchestra will play for our traditional father-daughter dance. I invite all fathers and daughters to join us on the dance floor. Octavia's heart sank even as her expression remained carefully neutral. The father-daughter dance had been a Gala tradition since before her accident, a moment she had once treasured. But in the 3 years since the fire that had claimed her mother and marked her permanently, Thaddeus had found increasingly creative ways to avoid it, uncomfortable with the attention her scars drew when they stood together. Couples moved forward eagerly, but Thaddeus remained at the microphone, introducing the CEO of a potential partner company. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge Xavier Mercer, whose groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence promises to revolutionize how we approach adaptive learning environments. A distinguished man stood to acknowledge the applause, and Thaddeus descended from the stage to engage him in conversation, strategically positioning himself far from the dance floor as the music began. Octavia sat frozen as couples filled the space before her, fathers twirling daughters with genuine affection. Her composure finally cracked, a single tear tracking down her scarred cheek before she hastily wiped it away. In that moment of vulnerability, she looked younger than her 24 years, a child still hoping for approval that never seemed to come. From his station near the service doors, Emery watched, his professional detachment faltering as he witnessed not just public humiliation, but the deeper wound of parental rejection laid bare before, a crowd too self-absorbed to recognize the cruelty unfolding before them. The father-daughter dance continued as Octavia remained seated at her table, alone, watching the swirl of dancers with carefully concealed longing. Her father remained deep in conversation with potential investors, occasionally glancing her way with a look that seemed more concerned with her impact on his image than her comfort. A group of young socialites nearby made a game of avoiding the empty chairs around Octavia, exaggeratedly choosing seats farther away despite the crowded room. One woman in a designer red dress mimicked a shudder as she walked past, triggering stifled laughter from her companions. "Such a shame," whispered a blonde woman in her 30s, her diamond earrings catching the light as she leaned toward her friend. "All that money and they could not fix her face." "I heard it was a lab accident," replied her companion, adjusting her silk shawl. "Poetic justice for a family that built its fortune on experimental tech." A man in a custom tuxedo joined their circle, champagne flute in hand. Thaddeus probably keeps her around for the sympathy points, great for charitable donations. Emery, passing with a tray of empty glasses, paused as he witnessed Octavia's moment of vulnerability. His eyes moved between her, the dancing fathers and daughters, and Thaddeus deep in business conversation across the room. Something resolute settled in his expression, and he headed toward the kitchen with new purpose. The service area bustled with controlled chaos, servers weaving around each other as they refreshed trays and received instructions from the catering manager. Emery placed his tray on a stainless steel counter and straightened his bow tie, checking his reflection in a polished serving platter. "What are you doing, Calloway?" asked another server, noticing his unusual attention to his appearance mid-shift. "Something I probably should not," Emery replied, smoothing his jacket. He approached the catering manager, a stern woman named Vivienne, who ruled the event with military precision. "Ms. Laurent," he said formally, "I need 2 minutes." Vivienne looked up from her clipboard, surprise evident on her face. Emery had been working her events for nearly 2 years and had never requested special treatment or breaks. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Not exactly," Emery explained, his voice low. "I would like permission to approach a guest for a dance." Vivienne's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "That would be highly irregular, Calloway. Staff does not interact with guests beyond service." "I understand," he replied, "but sometimes rules need to be broken for the right reasons." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. This about the Winterstone girl, is not it? I saw how they left her sitting there. Emery did not confirm or deny, but something in his expression must have convinced her. 2 minutes, she finally said. Not a second more. And if there is blowback, I will not be able to protect your position. I understand, he replied. Thank you. Emery emerged from the kitchen without his tray, his bow tie straightened and jacket smoothed. He moved with quiet confidence through the crowded ballroom, no longer trying to remain invisible. Guests who would normally step aside, without noticing now, did double takes as a server moved with intention rather than deference. The orchestra finished one piece and began another, a gentle waltz that seemed to momentarily quiet the room. Emery reached Octavia's table and stood before her, no longer invisible, but still carrying himself with the same quiet dignity that had become second nature through years of service work. May I have this dance? He asked simply, extending his hand. The question hung in the air, drawing attention from nearby tables. Octavia looked up in shock, first checking to see if this was some cruel prank, then searching his face for pity. She found neither, just genuine invitation and steady respect. You will get in trouble, she warned softly. Some things matter more, he replied. As she hesitantly placed her scarred hand in his, a ripple of gasps and whispers spread through the ballroom. A waiter dancing with the CEO's daughter broke every unwritten rule of the evening. They moved onto the dance floor as conversations halted and all eyes turned to watch. Emery led with surprising grace, revealing another layer of himself. This was a man who once knew more refined circles. His posture was perfect, his steps assured without being showy. Octavia followed tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she realized he was not embarrassed to be seen with her, that he held her scarred hand as naturally as if it were unmarked. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly, aware of the stares surrounding them. Because everyone deserves to dance, he answered simply. Then, after a moment, he added, and because I know what it is like to be seen as less than who you are. Across the room, Thaddeus Winterstone finally noticed the commotion and turned to see his daughter dancing with a server. His face darkened as he excused himself from his conversation and started moving toward the dance floor, his stride purposeful and his expression thunderous. But something unexpected happened before he could intervene. The initial shock in the room began to shift. The genuine connection between the dancers became impossible to mock. Octavia's face had transformed, her scars still visible, but, somehow less defining as genuine joy, illuminated her features. Emery's respectful attentiveness stood in stark contrast to the earlier cruelties of the elite guests. An elderly woman at a premier table began applauding softly. This was Dorothea Landon, known as much for her philanthropy as for her refusal to tolerate social cruelty. Others joined in, including some of the staff who had paused in their duties to watch. Even a few of the socialites who had been whispering earlier seemed affected by the simple dignity of the moment. The dance itself was nothing extraordinary, just a basic waltz, but the humanity displayed in those simple steps resonated through the room. Here was connection without agenda, kindness without expectation of return. In a room built on transactions and appearances, the authenticity was as conspicuous as Octavia's scars had been minutes earlier. Thaddeus reached the edge of the dance floor just as the music concluded. Emery stepped back and offered a respectful bow to Octavia, who curtsied in return, her eyes bright with emotion. The applause grew, forcing Thaddeus to recalculate his approach in front of his guests. "You are fired," he said quietly to Emery, trying to maintain his public smile. Before Emery could respond, Octavia spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "If he goes, father, so do I, along with my shares in the company and my mother's patents." The threat landed with precision. Thaddeus's expression flickered between rage and calculation. He was a businessman above all else, and the patents Octavia had inherited from her mother, a brilliant engineer, were central to several of the company's most profitable products. "This is hardly the place, Octavia," he said, his voice tight. "I disagree," she replied. "This seems exactly the place for truth." The standoff drew even more attention from the surrounding guests, many of whom were major investors or business partners. Thaddeus could not afford a public scene, particularly one that might reveal family discord to shareholders. "And who exactly are you?" Thaddeus demanded of Emery, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. attempting to regain control of the situation by putting the server in his place. Emery met his gaze without flinching. Just a father who could not bear watching another father fail his daughter. The simple truth hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. Around them, the crowd had grown silent again, but with a different quality, expectant rather than judgmental. Many of the fathers who had just danced with their own daughters looked distinctly uncomfortable. Dorothea Landon approached from the edge of the crowd, a formidable figure in designer black who moved with authority despite her 78 years. She studied Emery with narrowed eyes. "I know you," she said, her voice carrying in the silence. "You are Augustine Calloway's son, the composer." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as context shifted yet again. Augustine. Calloway had been a celebrated composer and pianist whose death in a car accident 7 years ago had cut short a brilliant career. "I was," Emery acknowledged simply. "Now I am just Emery Calloway, working to support my daughter." "Your father was a friend," Dorothea said. "A great talent lost too soon. He would be proud to see his son remember what truly matters." The revelation transformed how the crowd perceived Emery. No longer just a presumptuous server. He became someone with a story, a fallen scion of creative aristocracy. Such narratives they could understand and even romanticize. Dorothea turned to Thaddeus with a steely smile. "Your company's new educational software. I believe my foundation was considering a substantial investment. I would like to discuss terms, including a new position for Mr. Calloway. Someone with his background in both the arts and service would be invaluable for the cultural initiatives we discussed." It was a masterful move. Dorothea had publicly backed Thaddeus into a corner where his only graceful exit was acceptance. Her foundation's investment had been a major talking point in his earlier speech, already announced to shareholders. Thaddeus, trapped by public scrutiny and financial opportunity, forced a smile. "Of course, Dorothea. We would be delighted to bring Mr. Calloway on board." Octavia's eyes widened slightly, but she controlled her expression quickly. The power dynamics in the room had shifted so rapidly that even she seemed surprised by the outcome. Emery himself appeared momentarily taken aback before his composure returned. "That is very generous, but I have responsibilities to consider. My daughter needs stability." "Bring her to my office on Monday," Thaddeus said, his businessman's mind already calculating how to turn this situation to his advantage. "We will discuss a package that accounts for your circumstances." The orchestra, sensing the tension easing, began playing again. Couples returned to the dance floor, though many guests remained clustered in small groups, discussing the unexpected drama. The story would undoubtedly spread through Manhattan's elite circles by morning, embellished with each retelling. Dorothea took Emery's arm, guiding him slightly away from Thaddeus and Octavia. "Augustine never mentioned you had a daughter," she said quietly. "She is my stepdaughter technically," Emery explained. "Her mother and I married after Augustine died. When she passed away 3 years ago, Wren had no other family." Dorothea nodded, understanding filling her eyes. "So, you gave up your own pursuits to raise her." "There was nothing to give up that mattered more," he replied simply. Across the room, Octavia stood with her father, their conversation appearing tense despite their composed expressions. The public confrontation had shifted something between them, bringing long, simmering issues to the surface where they could no longer be ignored. "You humiliated me," Thaddeus said under his breath. "No, father," Octavia replied quietly. "You did that yourself when you left me sitting alone. Again." Their conversation was interrupted by well-wishers approaching to compliment the event and inquire about the touching moment they had witnessed. Thaddeus smoothly transitioned to host mode, his corporate training allowing him to navigate social waters regardless of emotional undercurrents. The remainder of the gala continued without further incident, though subtle changes permeated the atmosphere. Guests who had previously avoided Octavia now approached her, perhaps out of genuine remorse or simply fear of being on the wrong side of the evening's shifting social winds. Emery returned to his duties, though the other servers treated him with newfound respect, and guests now noticed him as he served, some even thanking him directly. As the event wound down and guests began departing, Octavia found herself once again near the ice sculpture, where she had stood alone hours earlier, but now her posture was different, her head held higher. Something awakened inside her that had been dormant for too long. Emery passed by with a tray of collected glasses, pausing briefly near her. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the dance?" he asked. "For seeing me," she replied. "Not just my scars, not just my father's daughter. Me." He nodded, understanding completely. "Monday, then?" "Monday," she confirmed with the first genuine smile of the evening. 1 week later, the Winterstone Technologies headquarters presented a different scene than the opulent ballroom. The sleek skyscraper dominated the Manhattan skyline, its glass exterior reflecting clouds and neighboring buildings. Inside, the modern office space buzzed with purposeful activity, employees moving between meeting rooms and workstations with laptops and coffee. Emery Calloway, now dressed in business casual attire, walked beside Octavia through the bright, open floor plan of the executive level. His navy blazer and pressed slacks were a far cry from the waiter's uniform of the previous week, yet he carried himself with the same quiet dignity. They shared the easy conversation of new friends finding unexpected common ground. "My father is still furious," Octavia admitted with a small smile that suggested this did not trouble her, as it once might have. "But Dorothea Landon's foundation committed $15 million to the educational initiative, contingent upon you heading the arts integration program." "And your role?" Emery asked, noting how differently Octavia carried herself here. Gone was the hunched posture and averted gaze. Though her scars remained unchanged, she seemed less defined by them, more comfortable in her own skin. "I am overseeing the Burn Survivors Scholarship Fund," she replied, touching her scars unconsciously. Something good should come from all this. They paused at a conference room where Thaddeus Winterstone was visible through glass walls, his body language suggesting he was still adjusting to new realities. When he saw them, he offered a stiff nod, not warm, but acknowledging. The conversation inside appeared intense, executives pointing at presentations and financial projections. "He is trying," Octavia said. "That is more than before." "Change rarely happens all at once," Emery observed, "especially for men accustomed to controlling everything around them." Octavia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "The accident changed me physically, but it took me 3 years to start changing inside, to find my voice. I cannot expect him to transform overnight." "You found more than your voice at the gala," Emery said. "You found your power. There is a difference." As they continued their tour, employees greeted Octavia with genuine warmth, many addressing her directly rather than looking past her as they once might have. A few even openly admired her new project, suggesting partnerships or resources. The shift was subtle but significant, a corporate culture slowly realigning around new values. Later that evening, Emery arrived at a modest apartment in Brooklyn, the commute from Manhattan having taken nearly an hour by subway. The contrast between the morning's corporate luxury and his home life was stark but not depressing. The apartment was small but filled with books, musical instruments, and evidence of a close, loving family life. Wren Calloway, 15 and full of nervous energy, was setting the table for dinner when he entered. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a school sweatshirt over jeans. A cello case leaned against one wall, sheet music scattered across the coffee table. "How was day 4 in corporate America?" she asked with teenage skepticism, placing mismatched plates on their small dining table. "Surreal," Emery admitted, hanging his blazer on a hook by the door and rolling up his sleeves. "But for the first time since your mother died, I feel like I am using all of myself again, not just my hands." Wren studied him for a moment, trying to appear nonchalant, though her concern was evident. "You are not going back to music, are you? Because I know that is what you really should be doing, but we have a good thing going here, and my school is finally working out, and moving again would be a whole thing, and I just got first chair in the orchestra, and I know that is selfish, but I just got comfortable, and I do not want to move again, and I am sorry that I am so selfish, and I am trying not to be, but I just finally got to where I fit in, and I just want to be normal for 5 seconds. The words tumbled out in a rush, revealing fears she had clearly been harboring since his new position had materialized. Emery crossed the room and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "Breathe," he said with a small smile. "We are not going anywhere. The job is here in New York, and it actually pays enough that we might even be able to stay in this apartment without my night shifts at the restaurant." Relief on her face was palpable. Really? You promise? Really, he confirmed. Besides, my music days were over long before your mother and I met. That was a different life. As they prepared dinner together, moving around their small kitchen with the coordinated rhythm of a family routine, Wren asked about Octavia, whom she had clearly heard about. She is coming for dinner next week, Emery said, stirring a pot of pasta. She wants to meet the girl who inspired her father to break the rules. Wait, she calls you my father? Wren asked, surprised, pausing in the act of grating cheese. That is what I am, Emery responded simply, testing the pasta for doneness. But you are not my biological dad. You always say you are my stepdad. Family is not about biology, Emery told her, turning to meet her eyes directly. It is about who stays, who sees you for who you really are, who dances with you when everyone else turns away. Wren considered this, then nodded, a small smile forming. I guess I will need to clean my room before she comes over. Is she cool? She seemed cool from what you said. She is finding her way to cool, Emery replied thoughtfully. Just like someone else I know. The days that followed established new patterns for both households. At Winterstone Technologies, Emery's arts integration program began taking shape, combining his understanding of creativity with a practical approach to education that impressed even the most skeptical executives. His background in both the arts and service gave him unique insights into accessibility and engagement. Octavia, meanwhile, transformed her scholarship initiative from a concept into a concrete program. She reached out to burn units at local hospitals, contacted survivor groups, and began building a network of support beyond just financial assistance. For the first time in her professional life, she found herself leading rather than following, defining a vision rather than executing someone else's. The relationship between father and daughter evolved as well, though not without struggle. Thaddeus, accustomed to control and deference, found himself forced to acknowledge his daughter as both an heir and a person in her own right. Their weekly dinners, once exercises in strained politeness, gradually became forums for genuine, if sometimes difficult, conversation. You never visited me in the hospital after the first week, Octavia said during one such dinner, 6 weeks after the gala. It was a statement she had held inside for 3 years, finally finding the courage to voice it. Thaddeus placed his fork down carefully, his expression guarded. The company was in crisis after the lab explosion. The stock was plummeting. Lawsuits were being filed. I was fighting to preserve what your mother and I built. I know, Octavia replied calmly. I understand the business reasons. I am asking about the personal ones. Her father was silent for a long moment, his usual confidence absent. I could not bear to see you in pain, he finally admitted. Every time I looked at you, I saw Eleanor. I saw my failure to protect either of you. It was not an apology, but it was honesty, perhaps the first real honesty between them since the accident. A beginning, not an end. At the Callaway apartment, change took different forms. With Emery's new salary, small luxuries became possible. A new cello for Wren, repairs to long-broken appliances, fresh paint for walls that had faded years ago. More importantly, time became available, evenings together without the exhaustion of double shifts, weekends to explore the city rather than catch up on sleep. When Octavia joined them for dinner, the initial awkwardness quickly dissolved into genuine connection. She arrived bearing flowers and a vintage jazz record she had found after learning of Emery's musical background, clearly having researched thoughtfully. Wren, initially shy and a bit starstruck by their wealthy visitor, blossomed under Octavia's genuine interest in her music and school experiences. You play beautifully, Octavia told Wren after she performed a piece on her cello. Your father must be very proud. The words were simple, but carried weight, acknowledging the family they had built without qualifiers or explanations. Wren's smile in response illuminated the whole apartment. Later, as they shared dessert, Octavia asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. Why did you do it, that night at the gala? You must have known it would cause a scene. Emery considered his answer carefully. When my wife died, I had to decide what kind of example I wanted to set for Wren. It would have been easy to become bitter, to blame the world for what we had lost. But that would have taught her that pain defines us, that circumstances control us. I wanted her to learn that we always have choices, even when they are difficult ones. So you risked your job for a principal, Octavia said. No, Emery corrected gently. I risked my job for a person who deserved to be seen. The principal was secondary. 6 months later, the Winterstone Technologies annual charity gala took place again, but with noticeable differences. The venue remained the Bellarose Grand Ballroom, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The decor was still luxurious, but less ostentatious, focused more on showcasing student artwork and innovation than on displays of wealth. The guest list had expanded to include artists, educators, and diverse faces not typically seen in such exclusive circles. Emery, now dressed in a tuxedo, as a guest rather than a uniform as staff, moved through the crowd with Ren beside him. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress, her hair styled by Octavia earlier that evening in an impromptu bonding session. He introduced his daughter proudly to colleagues and Arts Foundation representatives, her initial nervousness giving way to poised confidence as the evening progressed. Across the room, Octavia greeted Byrne, survivors from the scholarship program, her scars now worn with confidence rather than shame. The recipients ranged from college students to working professionals returning to school, each with stories of resilience that rivaled her own. When she caught Emery's eye across the crowd, they shared a smile of mutual understanding, a private acknowledgement of how much had changed in 6 short months. The orchestra began to play, and the dance floor filled once again. Thaddeus Winterstone approached his daughter, more tentatively than he had ever done anything in his life. "I believe this is our dance," he said, extending his hand, "if you will still have it." The offer contained an unspoken apology, an acknowledgement of past failures, and a step toward redemption, all wrapped in a simple invitation. Octavia studied her father for a long moment, seeing both the flawed man who had hurt her and the imperfect parent who was trying to change. "I would like that," she said finally, placing her hand in his. As Octavia and Thaddeus joined the other fathers and daughters on the dance floor, Emery led Ren forward as well. She had been practicing with him in their living room all week, determined not to embarrass herself at her first formal event. "You look beautiful tonight," Emery told her as they began to dance. "Your mother would be so proud of who you have become." "We did okay, did not we?" Ren asked, suddenly serious despite the festive surroundings. "After everything, we built something good." "We did more than okay," Emery assured her. "We thrived." The ballroom had transformed from the previous year, still elegant, but now infused with authentic connection rather than superficial display. Status and appearance no longer determined who belonged and who did not. The true worth of each person had become visible, just as Emery had seen beyond Octavia's scars from the very beginning. As the music continued, the two families moved in their separate orbits, occasionally crossing paths on the dance floor, exchanging smiles of recognition. They were connected not by circumstance or convenience, but by a deeper understanding that the most important things in life are often invisible to those who value only what can be measured, counted, or displayed. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen quietly, when one person refuses to accept the ugliness of the world and instead creates a moment of beauty that changes everything. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Share your stories of unsung heroes in the comments below, and subscribe to see more stories that remind us all of the power of simple human dignity.